Thank you again for joining us at the 2021 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference Competitive Advantage Talks, presented by Kager, also known as Kraft Analytics Group. My name is Grant Hazinski, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. It's my pleasure to introduce our presentation, Vision, the Ultimate Competitive Advantage in Sports. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Daniel Levy, to the stage.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, audience, for listening to the topic today, sports vision, and how that is the ultimate competitive advantage in sports performance. A few words of background about myself. I'm a sports vision specialist, as I mentioned. I've been working in the field since about 1992 with many elite professional athletes, total of about 15 Major League Baseball clubs, several NBA teams, NHL teams, just back actually yesterday from a Premier League footballer in the United Kingdom, NFL players, Olympic teams, and so forth. So over 30 years, I've been able to put together quite a bit of experience and a quite large database of results in terms of vision in professional athletes. I've, as you can notice, organized meetings and hopefully been able to push this field forward to some extent. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is the role of vision in sports. I think it's a competitive advantage that people don't really recognize as being something that they can optimize to their benefit. We'll talk about the sports vision pyramid, and we'll talk about the role of analytics and data science, specifically in how we test vision, and the relationship between hand-eye coordination and batting performance. And I'll tease with a couple of future steps that may be interesting as things move forward. Before we really talk about vision, I wanted to show you an example from a video on YouTube of what we look for as being the optimal ability in vision.
Evan, there's been a lot of changes this offseason for your team. How do you feel your chances are in the AL East?
I mean, I love our chances. You know, it's been. Guys, keep it on the field. Guys, keep it on the field.
So from this video, we can see several things. First of all, we can see how very pleased the reporter is here that Evan was able to make such a well-timed catch of the ball. And even though this video isn't probably 100% true, it does highlight the importance of vision in sports. And you can imagine that for Evan to stop that ball prior to it striking the reporter, he had to first see the ball. He had to make a decision about how to move his hand in order to intercept the ball. And he had to obviously time that and place his hand in exactly the right spot to make that catch and save some significant cosmetic injury. Well, that ability is exactly the advantage that sports vision provides athletes in performance on the field.
Evan, there's been a lot.
For example, in sports, I don't know of any sport where an athlete plays with their eyes closed. We need our eyes open in order to see what's happening in the current time and in order to allow us to predict what's going to happen in the future. That prediction is exactly that competitive advantage. Prediction in sports is rampant. A hockey player has to predict the movement of the puck, whether he's the offensive player or he's the goalie. A football quarterback, for example, has to predict where his receiver is going to be at any point in the future and place the pass just at the right point, at the right time, in order for a completion and success. Myriad sports, we can come up with examples like that. But the idea of to predict what's going to happen in the future based on your visual function is the essence of that competitive advantage. And we can describe that advantage by thinking about what we call the sports vision pyramid. Sports vision pyramid, like all pyramids, is a very stable structure if the base is sufficiently stable. If one has a very narrow base and a very wide top, obviously that pyramid is going to wobble. But if you have a strong base, you'll be able to create a very, very well standing and long-lasting pyramid where the goal of on-field performance at the top of the pyramid will be very high. Well, we can look from the top to the bottom to the top. It doesn't really matter. But if you think about performance in the field, in order to do that, one needs to have a motor response. One has to have a movement of the hand, just like we saw previously with that catch on the field. And that motor response has to be guided by vision. Well, that visually guided motor response only can start when there's a decision. The decision is made to make a motor action. Well, that decision being made is based on what the athlete sees on the pitch, on the diamond, on the football field, and so forth. Well, in order to make a decision, you have to have good vision from both eyes. And both eyes' vision together, we call stereo vision or depth perception. Well, if your 3D depth perception is not good, that obviously is going to affect your decision, which will affect your motor action, which will minimize or reduce your on-field performance. But to use both eyes together, we really have to first talk about how both eyes individually work. And for that, we talk about sharpness of vision and contrast sensitivity. And so you can imagine that if each level is optimized below, the subsequent level above will be that much stronger, leading to better on-field performance. It doesn't make sense to train somebody to react quickly to a task if he can't see the task, the event. In order, you have to train someone without being sure the bottom of the pyramid is strong is somewhat futile. And so we're going to look first at a vision test that we developed to look at the bottom of that pyramid. Now, everybody is familiar with the eye chart that you see on the left. We probably almost know it by heart, the big E on top. Well, that eye chart was used in doctors' offices worldwide for the last 150 years. Unfortunately, is not reflective of the vision required for real world or sports performance. That eye chart is targets that are stable, static. They're 100% contrast, black on a white background. And you can spend as much time as you want looking at those targets. What we all know in real world vision is more like what we see the picture on the right, where we have a somewhat dusk time where it's cloudy, foggy. We have lower contrast. It's hard to see what's written on the signs. We have to react quickly because we're driving a car and soon we're going to pass the sign or pass our turn off if we don't see it properly. And so a test that is able to evaluate vision based on small targets, certainly, but low contrast targets that are only shown for a short time is more reflective, as you'll see momentarily, in vision required for sports, and I suspect in vision required overall. Well, we created a test called the AVTS test, and that test employs a fairly advanced statistical theory called item response theory. We're all familiar with item response theory, maybe not by that name, but we're familiar with it by how it's used. For example, we've all probably taken the SAT test, the ACT test, or any other standardized test, and all those tests are based on item response theory. The idea being that you have many, many different questions or many, many different visual targets, and you can stratify the difficulty of each of those targets from the easiest to the hardest. And you can show people those targets and have them identify what they see, and you'll find a point where they get most of them right that are easier, and they get most of them wrong that are harder, and that's their threshold. And you can call it a core score, you can call it an SAT score, whatever you wish, but that's their ability on that range of questions. Well, we created visual targets that had different sizes, in fact, 13 sizes, different contrasts, 5 different levels, and different amount of time they were shown. Some of them were shown for unlimited time, just like the standard vision test with the eye chart, but many of them are shown for much less time, 800 milliseconds, 600 milliseconds, even 400 milliseconds, which is less than half a second. And so you get a quick look at a small, faint target. I want to give you an example of what that's like because it's quite a challenge. You can see here the player on the right uses an iPad and the target's at the end of the room there, and he has to answer them. The distance is typically around 4 meters. It can go up to 6 meters. And here's some examples of the targets. And what I'm hoping you see in this is a flash of 4 bars and a ring or letter C with a missing piece inside of it. And the task here is for the athlete to pick out the opening on the ring. It could be on the left, it could be on the right, it could be on the top, it could be on the bottom. But as you see, the targets are small, the targets are faint, and they're not shown for a long time. They flash for a very short time on the screen. It's a very challenging test, but we start with some easy ones and we end with very hard ones, and no one can get 100% on them because that would be a useless test. We always had to have somebody getting something wrong so that we know what their limit, what their threshold is. And when we look at those targets on what we call a person item map, or ordering the difficulty of those 3 components of the targets, we come up with this diagram on the right, which allows us to understand how each target is either easier or more difficult than the previous target. And we can then order on our test a range of targets from easy to hard and measure someone's threshold. We've published a paper regarding the statistics and the science behind this, how this can be used to measure visual function, and that paper is shown on the left, if anyone's interested in more detail about this. And we've also looked to see how these results can connect to actual on-field performance. In a paper we published about a year or 2 ago in Scientific Reports on the left, we showed that when we compare the people that had the best vision, the top 20%, the top quintile, to the bottom 20%, to the bottom quintile, as you can see on this table on the right-hand side of the slide, the top 20% had a core score of 1.95. The bottom 20% had an average core score of minus 0.14, where 0 is set as the average, let's say 20/20 vision person. And so obviously there's a very large difference statistically between those two because we sorted them by that. But more interestingly, if you look at the 6 other data points to the right of the core score, you'll see that there are statistically significant differences between the core scores at the top versus the bottom 20% in 5 different plate discipline metrics. In other words, specific batting metrics that are really key to the visual ability of the batter and not interfered with by the defensive ability of someone making a diving catch or an amazing catch out in the outfield. Interestingly enough, if you look then at the years of Major League service, you see there's no statistical difference between the top and bottom 20%, giving you the understanding that it's not just vision that lets someone play Major League Baseball, but we can separate batting ability based on this function. Well, vision on the bottom part of the pyramid isn't the only thing that's important, obviously, but if you have good vision, you move up the pyramid, you get to other things like hand-eye coordination and reaction time. And if you have a large enough sample of data, you can see that there's quite a difference between athletes' batting ability, again, using these plate discipline metrics, between those who have good hand-eye coordination and those who have poor hand-eye coordination. In fact, we published the paper on the top right. Another group published a paper on the bottom left using 2 different evaluative systems, using 2 different statistical approaches. We used a classical approach. They used a Bayesian approach. And with those 2 different systems and 2 different approaches, we showed the same thing. Both were very large groups of professional baseball players, and that's going to be required because you can't expect to show an effect on batting when you only have 10 or 15 batters, a change in their visual ability or training. Batting has too many components to be affected by that dramatically by that small group of vision findings. So large data sets on elite athletes will be able to tease out these fine differences between ability that are based on visual function alone. And these are 2 papers that describe that. Well, we've looked at some of the current technology. Let's look at some of the things that maybe show for the future how we can get a little bit more of a competitive advantage in sports using vision. Well, one of those has to do with eye tracking. Currently, we have the ability to have someone wear a pair of glasses. We can see what they're looking at on the scene. There's 2 cameras involved. And we published a paper on one of the NBA teams we work with in the bottom left that you can see a couple years ago. And if you look at the 2 images of the backboards, you can see that there's many green dots. The image of the backboard on the left shows green dots that are very clustered right around the rim. The image on the right shows green dots all scattered throughout the backboard and the rim itself. Well, when we looked at these 2 people, the image on the left was what happened when you got 30 out of 30 free throws. And the image on the right are the people that had 16 or 18 out of 30 free throws correct. And what we found was there was a very significant effect of fixation on the rim in ability to get free throws and perform effectively on the basketball court. This is something that's been shown before in other sports. It's been shown in basketball as well. And one can think of the quiet eye as a technique to train this ability in order to make sure that people have optimal vision and optimal use of their eyes in order to perform the basketball shooting task. But it doesn't end with the physical shooting on a basketball court. The image in the middle shows a screenshot from our augmented reality, virtual reality system, where we also track eye movements. You can see that white dome behind the soccer ball. That white dome was the fixation point where this athlete, in fact, this is the Premier League athlete that I just was with last week, what he was looking at when the ball was coming towards him. And we recreate plays in football and soccer that he actually performed in, and we look to see what he looks at as the play develops and the ball comes towards him. And more importantly, we wanted to know what he was looking at as the play then developed, as he picked out the target to make his pass, and wanted to know where in that football pitch he was looking and why he was looking at those things. And in fact, the first time that he had ever seen what he was doing in retrospect after the occurrence. And so the use of eye tracking is something I think that's becoming more and more popular in sports, and certainly is another little advantage that teams and athletes can use to their benefit. Well, the COVID experience obviously has been terrible for everybody involved, for many, but in everything that's poor, there may be some opportunity, and we've been able to use our time at home to create some of these vision tests that we can use remotely through a telemedicine type platform. By employing augmented reality, some AI-based analyses, we're able to actually perform many of these tests remotely from home or from the hotel near the training camp, because entering the training camps is difficult due to the need to minimize outside contact and keep everyone healthy. And so by using these techniques with the earlier item response theory and so forth, we're able to still provide the services to the athletes to obtain maximum vision without risking during this period of COVID anyone's health. Well, what's the main takeaways? The main takeaway is that certainly elite vision, optimal vision is critical for sporting performance. It will give the competitive advantage to an athlete and to a team that other teams and other athletes don't have. And if you employ a multidisciplinary approach where you have the physicians, the understanding the physiologic functions, you have the statisticians that can add their expertise, and you have the cutting edge hardware with programmers who can put that all together, you'll end up with systems and analysis techniques that are different than was done before and that have been shown, as I mentioned in some of the papers here, to have the direct relevance to on-field, on-court, and sports performance. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions.